Hello, this is Monica Volkmar, and you're listening to Movement Detectivery. You might notice that I sound a little bit different. Perhaps you'll notice that the audio quality sounds a little bit better. I'm trying not to let it freak me out too much, but I'm actually recording in a proper podcasting studio with a real microphone and a Rodecaster Pro too. So that's pretty exciting. Don't expect this from me for every episode, but I'm here at the Victoria State Library in Melbourne, and little did I know until very recently, they actually have a podcasting studio here. So for anyone who might not realize that your local library has a shit ton of cool resources for free available to members, you might want to check that out. So today I'm going to be answering a listener who is an anatomy and motion student question. And the question today is all about palpating the talus bone. So this is going to be a great topic if you are currently learning Gary Ward's anatomy and motion curriculum, a huge component of which is understanding the feet, both in their static alignment and their movement in the closed chain. A big part of what we learn in the in-person courses in anatomy and motion from Gary Ward is that it's crucial to be able to accurately locate the bony landmarks of the talus. It's a huge and important part of the assessment process in the anatomy and motion method. So obviously this is not a video, and I'm not going to be able to actually hold your hand literally and help you to feel a talus bone. But I do have some thoughts that I think will be very helpful. So before I get to today's question, I just want to make a standard disclaimer that the answers I provide in this podcast episode are not meant to be any kind of personalized advice and should not replace any personalized advice from a medical or healthcare professional. My thoughts and opinions in this episode are just that, opinions, and they do not constitute a practitioner-client relationship and are meant to be taken with a grain of salt. My answers to these questions are grounded in many philosophies for looking at the human body in motion, but the most impactful one, and particularly for the answer of the question today, is anatomy in motion. Anatomy in motion is a movement system that looks at how the body moves through the gait cycle and uses specific movement interventions to teach the body how to couple together closed chain joint mechanics in a way that is more ideal for efficient movement as per the flow motion model taught and created by Gary Ward. And I have an interview with Gary Ward that you can listen to, and it was awesome. So please go and listen to that episode if you dig it. So Gary's model is theoretical, but I have had great success using it with both myself and my clients to help with a multitude of movement restrictions that were at the root of their primary complaints. The answer to the question in this episode will be through my anatomy and motion lens. And if you're interested in learning more and exploring anatomy and motion in your own body, which you might be, you may like to check out my online program, Liberated Body, which I designed with the understanding that you are the only person who knows what's best for your body. No one else can tell you what to do. You can trust your body, and your body can trust you back. And I'm in the process of making some improvements to the Liberated Body program structure, which will include more personalized guidance and support from me. And it will not only include some guided movement explorations that take you through your feet, spine, hips, and upper body and shoulders, but I'll also be adding in a section on how to do your own gait analysis and be able to reassess what's changing in your body as a result of exploring the anatomy and motion movements throughout the program. So this program is going to be great for any movement and manual therapy professionals or movers who want to learn how to move better and want to understand how the human body is actually supposed to move, not only to help maybe your clients move better, but to help yourselves. In fact, a lot of well-educated movement and manual therapy professionals still suck at feeling how their own bodies are moving, regardless of their knowledge, because they haven't truly embodied all their education. We've all got blind spots of awareness of our bodies, and that stuff that we don't know about is the stuff that we aim to improve by moving through, not around. And we've all got compensations that cause us to move around our problems. But anyway, to get the details for the next Liberated Body program, you can go to my website, monicavolkmar.com/liberated-body-workshop. Anyway, let's get to today's question. And this question is from one of my paid subscribers on Substack named Andy. So Andy wrote to me, "Good morning, Monica. So when I followed and sponsored your page, it wasn't so I could keep firing questions to you. So this won't be a regular thing, I promise." It's okay. When you first started doing this work, and by this work, Andy means anatomy in motion, did you ever have any occasions where you couldn't find, for example, the talus bone on one of your client's feet? I had a client yesterday. I'm having members from my gym come in for free, so I don't have the pressure of having to give results every time. And I couldn't find her talus bones. Apologies if that's a very silly question, but I'm not giving up until I'm very good at this, so I have to look stupid to do that. I will. Thank you for your time. All right, well, thank you, Andy, for that great question. It's not silly at all, and maybe before I start officially answering it, I have to tell a story, because I also was that person who would not give up even if I looked stupid. So when I first began my anatomy in motion journey, I was working as a personal trainer, and I had never even bothered. Well, gotta adjust this microphone a bit so it's in front of my face. Sorry for that squeaking. So I had never even bothered to learn any of the foot bones, which, looking back, is extremely ironic, given that the course is known for being about how the foot works. Not just about how the foot works, but that's a big part of the whole course. Anyway, a few hours into the 6-day Finding Center immersion in 2015, I quickly felt like I was drowning in an anatomical ocean. Not only was I being asked to learn the 3-dimensional movements that comprise pronation and supination of the foot, but we were being asked to reference bones and their movement that I'd never even looked at or palpated before. I was a personal trainer, and I didn't really touch bodies at the time, especially not really their feet. So Gary's describing how important the talus bone, wait, is it talus or talus? I can't even remember what I've been saying. I'm going to say talus. So Gary was describing how important the talus bone is and was talking about its movement and pronation and supination in 3 dimensions, and I was just lost because I have no idea what he's talking about. And I'm trying to follow along, but I just can't keep up. So I put up my hand and I asked, what's the talus bone? And the funny thing is that I was too ignorant to even know that question made me sound ignorant. Gary didn't laugh. He just patiently took the time to answer and ended up going on a tangent, as you know he does, about the importance of interpreting talus movement and how to palpate it. And everyone else in the room, I think, really appreciated it because he went into so much more detail and went into a few really interesting stories that I don't think he would have told if no one had prompted him to say more about the talus. So Gary probably will never let me live that moment down, and he always teases me that I was the one student who didn't know what the talus was. But I just wanted to share that because I want you to know that if you're struggling to palpate the talus, Andy, it's okay, because when I started my anatomy in motion journey, I didn't even know what it was. And this brings me to my next point, that palpation of bony landmarks in general is not easy. Not just the talus bones, but anything. Palpation is so subjective, and while I don't think it'll ever be 100% reliable inter-rater, meaning between different individuals, I think it can be very highly reliable intra-rater, that's you to you, tracking the same person over time. And I think that the more we can get confident in our palpation skills, then we can be clear. Subjective as it may be, that if we're palpating the same thing in the same spot each time, that we can accurately track the change in the body pretty well and watch someone's static alignment change over time. And to be completely honest, I have to admit that I get really nervous before I have to palpate anyone's PSIS, the posterior superior iliac spine on the back of the pelvis. I just personally find it so hard to find. And my instinct when I'm with clients or teaching is to just rush through it. So I need to consciously, before I do it, just pause and remind myself, just take the time to be as accurate as possible. Don't rush it. But I also give myself permission to be wrong. And then I just move on if I don't feel clear. Actually, this reminds me, last June 2025, I was in Toronto teaching the flow motion model course, and I was doing a whole session with assessment, a whole body assessment, and I had to use one of the students as an example. And part of it was drawing up their entire skeleton and drawing the stick figure, which is a big part of what we do in our assessment process for the AIM method. And the student I had with me, I was at the point where I had to palpate her PSIS. And I remembered being like, oh my God, just please, please, Jesus, let her PSIS be prominent enough for me to find quickly. And they weren't. You know, some people are just a little bit less easy, a little tucked away, and I just couldn't find them. So I did my best. I don't know, it was taking minutes to do it, and I could feel the pressure from the group. And so I had to ask the student, like, okay, I think I found it. Is this accurate? And then she took my hands and she actually physically moved me because she was a practitioner. I think she was a physio. So she physically moved my hands onto her PSIS. And I was like, oh, okay, thank you. That was not easy for me to find. So I appreciate that. And so I learned something that day too. And with every person that you go through that process with of fumbling around, you learn something. And I was a little bit mortified, but I just got over it and moved on. And I don't think anyone even remembers that happened. So permission to be wrong. It's totally okay. And in the beginning of my journey, I was a personal trainer and I didn't palpate bones to draw up people's static alignment. As movement professionals, we aren't usually formally taught how to find bony landmarks like massage therapists or physios are. And Andy, I think you wrote to me earlier that you are a personal trainer. Maybe I'm just inferring that because you wrote that you're in a gym. So if you have never been trained in palpation, you might be a little out of the comfort zone, and that's totally normal. Like I said, I was pretty scared to palpate when I first began trying to work with the anatomy and motion framework because I didn't know what I was doing, and I was afraid that I would just be wasting people's time. So I decided just to look at movement assessments. But then, over the years of hearing Gary say over and over, you need to know where the person's skeleton is set up statically as their point A in their current perception of center, if you're able to make sense of their symptoms and their current movement options. And he's right. We need to know, for example, is someone struggling to posteriorly tilt their pelvis because maybe they're stuck in an anterior tilt with the pelvis tipped forward and they can't get out of it. Or on the flip side, maybe they're already in a posterior tilt and can't tilt it further. So we need to know which scenario describes their current static position to make sense out of what movement strategy will actually best help them. So in my early days, I was working at a sports medicine clinic. This would have been 2015, and I was fresh to anatomy and motion. And I knew that I needed to practice, but I still felt too scared of wasting paying clients' time. So I drew on my network of dance students because I was a dancer and I just graduated from a dance program a few years prior, and I still had a connection to the admin of the dance program. So I emailed her and told her that I was offering free assessments to all the dance students, but I made it really clear that I wasn't trying to fix their problems. I just wanted to give them some insights into their posture and movement issues and raise their awareness. This was a really great way of giving me opportunities to practice palpating taluses and PSISs and other scary, unfamiliar things without the pressure of actually having to help any paying clients. So if it sounds like you've already done this, but if you can set something up like that for yourself, it can be a really amazing way of mastering your skills. It's all about getting in the reps of putting your hands on bodies. Another underappreciated thing about accurate palpation is it's not the information it gives you as a practitioner, but it's also the awareness that it can give your clients. Even if you aren't accurately palpating the thing, like the talus, you're not sure if you're finding it 100%. It'll give your clients such good awareness of their body that will help to speed along their progress, repatterning how they're moving. So, for example, in 2016, I was at an anatomy and motion course in Santa Cruz. And in the class, I was sitting with one of my friends, and she had also already taken the course. So both of us just kind of went off on our own into a corner during a lecture that we've heard before. And I asked her, because I felt like it was a weak point for me, I asked her if she'd allow me to practice palpating her spine so that I could get a better understanding of the 3D position of the vertebrae. And she agreed. So I got her to lie prone. And then over the course of about an hour, she helped me to palpate all the vertebrae in her lumbar spine, all the spinous processes, which wasn't something I'd ever really done in depth up until that point. And I was really bad at it. I was like, am I on it? Am I on it? Am I on it? And I had to keep getting her to confirm it. And what I was able to relay back to her after that experience was that it felt like her L3 vertebrae was resting in a more anterior position than the rest of her lumbars. So imagine that it's pushed forward a little bit. So she had more extension in that one section of her L3-4 segment of her spine. And in movement, she couldn't really flex that spot either. And because, pardon me, I had a little yawn there. Because I was so clear and confident at what I was feeling in my hands because of the time I took to palpate it, I was able to help her bring her awareness to that L3 segment and find a new way of moving it with my guidance. And that was a really valuable experience for both of us because the awareness that I got from taking the time to get really clear made it evident what exactly would benefit her body. She needed to flex one specific vertebrae that was stuck extended. And she just wasn't able to have that awareness of that unique movement limitation on her own. And she felt really great afterwards. She came back to me and said, wow, my back feels awesome. And that was a result of having clarity and specificity. Not only that, but it was a really great learning experience for me to have her to tell me, yes, you're on the right spot. No, that's not my spinous process. No, that's not L3, that's L2. And it just really helped me to hone my hands-on palpation skills. For her, it was an amazing experience for building her awareness of her body, being guided based on that really specific palpation that she had helped me to do. Sometimes it's teamwork like that. So something I might recommend for you is if you have some professionals that know where their talus is, have them help you to fine-tune where your hands are going. That can be a really valuable skill. Now, I wanted to tell that story to drive home the importance of clarity and specificity in our palpation skills. And it's not just about the talus, but any bone and every bone in the body, the clavicles, knees, scapulae, it's all important to map out. But maybe we should take a moment just to say specifically why knowing where the talus bone is that important. What makes the talus such an important bony landmark to be able to palpate? Well, by knowing how the feet and body have a specific set of ideal coupled joint relationships, if you can get an accurate sense of how the talus is positioned and can move dynamically, you can extrapolate this into a set of hypotheses about how the rest of the body might be organized in relation to the talus. And this information is priceless in understanding someone's situation and making better informed decisions. So here's just a few things that you can glean from knowing where someone's talus is. Firstly, in anatomy and motion, we call the talus the driver of the bus. What we mean by driver of the bus is that the movement of the talus has the power to move the whole body. In anatomy and motion in-person courses, something that we often do is play a game in which we palpate where someone's talus bones are, and then from that minimal information alone, we extrapolate where we might expect the rest of their body to be. What is the position of everything else in their body just based on the talus bones? And it's amazing how much is usually accurate. Not 100%, but a lot of it. So what information can we get from the talus, the static position? Firstly, we get information about where is their center of mass. Because in gait, we're so interested in the movement of the center of mass from one foot to the other, it's really helpful to know where theirs might be resting in their static alignment. So, for example, if someone has a talus that is more everted and internally rotated, it will push their center of mass away from that foot onto the other. So, let's say, for example, it was their right foot. You can stand up and try this. Put all the weight onto the inside edge of your right foot. In particular, imagine it's your talus, which is part of the rear foot, which also includes the calcaneus. So put all the pressure onto the inside edge of your right calcaneus, your heel bone. And can you feel how, if you just allow the rest of your body to move in response to that, how it should shift your weight into your left foot? You may even feel your pelvis being moved over to the left. So knowing this, it can be very helpful to understand if that person's primary complaint is, for example, their left groin feeling tight. And could it be because this right talus everted, internally rotated position might be preventing them from actually moving their center of mass off of their left foot? Their left hip might be stuck adducted, creating some shortening and compression in their left groin area and through the adductor muscles, which might not be able to lengthen. And it's not because they have hip problem necessarily, but because they just can't get their weight out of that left foot. And it might be related to something that happened to their right ankle. Now, we can also get information about which direction their pelvis would be rotated based on their talus alone. And the rotation of someone's pelvis in space tells us which leg they might be unconsciously biased to stepping forward onto. Going back to the example above, if we find that someone has a talus that's more internally rotated and everted, and the talus drives the bus, then we'll find that the pelvis will also be rotated in the same direction as the talus. Imagine that right foot has an internally rotated talus. That will rotate the pelvis in the same direction as the talus. So if you stand up and you try this, rotate your pelvis to the left. So the right side of your pelvis is now in front of the left side of your pelvis. You might feel that your weight goes into the inside of your right foot and internally rotates your talus on the right. And now if you were to pick up a foot and try to step forwards onto it from that position of left rotation, do you feel which foot is now more natural to step forward onto? And what you should find is that your right leg should be easier to step forwards onto with that left rotated pelvis. And this bias to favor your right leg forward in your gait could explain why, for example, you might experience something like right knee pain or a sore SI joint on the right or lower back pain. And it might come back to just having no option but to favor stepping onto that leg, coming back to the position that the talus is stuck in. And knowing more about gait mechanics and the specifics of the flow motion model and what the body does in each phase of gait, you can build a more clear picture of what movements someone might struggle to access based on their talus alone. For example, talus internal rotation is a pronation mechanic. And so any other joint mechanics that take place when the foot pronates can be considered part of a whole body pronation mechanic. One of two things could happen. If you have a talus more internally rotated on the right, the body might reduce pronation elsewhere on that right side to balance out the pronation of the foot. Or maybe the body will take on the shape of pronation on that side even more, which might look more like a more flexed knee or a more internally rotated femur or a more hiked pelvis on the right or a spine more laterally flexed towards that foot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they might not be able to get out of that pattern and get into pronation mechanics on the other leg unless that internally rotated talus can be accounted for if it's a true root of their problem. So that said, knowing the talus position tells us a lot about what options for movement the body has and will help guide us through the decision-making and assessment process, especially when taking into consideration their injury history and complaints. So maybe I'll illustrate this with a story of one of my clients from real life. So, my client, Cynthia, she came in recently with a painful left groin area. And when I assessed her talus position, we found that her left talus was more internally rotated. Sorry, her left talus was more inverted and externally rotated, which, if you've studied Gary Ward's work, points to a more supinated foot shape. So, what would you expect to be the position of her pelvis just based on that more supinated left foot? According to the flow motion model, you'd expect her to be in more supination on that side throughout that entire leg. So a supinated leg shape would show up as a pelvis that's lower, like a drop on that left side. Her hip might be more abducted, abducted. It might be more externally rotated, more extended, and her pelvis might be rotated towards her left foot. However, when I went to check her pelvis, it was completely the opposite. She was hiked on the left side of her pelvis, more internally rotated and adducted in her left hip, and she had a more supinated foot with a more pronated leg and pelvis. So that doesn't really add up. We also found that Cynthia couldn't pronate her left foot in motion, but she was very good at hiking her pelvis on the left and rotating her pelvis to the right and putting all the weight on that leg. She had even, prior to this appointment with me, she had gotten some cool testing done and had found that her force output on her left leg was much higher on her left than her right. Clearly, this is a discombobulated pattern. You shouldn't have a supinated foot with a pronating body on top of it. And the usual culprit in chaos like this is that something is in the injury history that needs to be understood. And that was true. It turns out she had a really bad ankle sprain on the left, which could explain why her foot still held a more supinated shape, as if she had rolled over and it had just never been taught how to unroll and get back to neutral. And she'd also had a head injury as a teenager, and it looked like the weight of her head was still sitting way over her left foot. Like she'd hit her head, it got pushed to the left, and it had never gotten her head back to the center of her body again. So it looked like she was being forced by her head position to bear weight into a left foot that couldn't pronate and absorb the shock through her body because of a past ankle injury. So we needed to organize both her head and her ankle. Organizing her head position to be more centered, and then teaching that left foot to pronate so it all synchronized together again. It would have been challenging to make sense of that pattern if I had not been confident at palpating her talus, both statically and dynamically on that side, to understand what was missing and how to give it back to her body. I would have just been kind of taking a shot in the dark. So, okay, now, Andy, I'm sorry I've rambled for this long. I want to actually address the part of your question where you actually ask about, did you have any occasions where you couldn't find the talus on any one of your clients' feet? Feet. My short answer is yes, 100%. I struggled for years, and it's totally okay. And to be fair, some people's talus bones are really hard to find. They might be in a strange position. Like, some people's talus bones are not where you think they are. You can't just expect to put your hands on the front of someone's ankle and it to be right there. It's not always right there. This is something that we discovered in some recent anatomy and motion study groups. It's really fun. I run a study group here in Melbourne, and it's usually a small group of us anatomy and motion students that get together, and we usually run through a whole body assessment each time, and it always involves palpating the talus bones, and I'm always humbled at how hard they are to find. They might also be, some people's talus bones are covered in dense tissue and tendons that are hard to feel through. And so it's difficult to actually feel the edges of the bone itself when that's the case. And just to be completely honest, I don't think I really started practicing talus palpation in earnest until I was given the opportunity to be a teacher for anatomy and motion. And then I thought, shit, I better get my act together. And so from that moment on, I, instead of being willy-nilly about my talus palpation practice, I did it on every single client I could and tried desperately to make up for my years of lost dicking around. I was asking everyone about their foot pressure, but I was still too unconfident to actually palpate the talus out of fear of looking stupid when I couldn't find it. And this was at least 5 or 6 years into my learning journey. So it just goes to show it's never too late to start, because these days I feel fairly confident that I can find anyone's talus. Also, if it's any reassurance, I don't think I even fully looked at the shoulders and scapular mechanics until about 3 years into learning anatomy and motion. So you don't need to master everything all at once. It's okay to go at your own pace, feel good about one thing, and then move on to the next thing that you feel like you need to bring up your competency on. One last embarrassing story. I distinctly remember a moment when I was at a friend and colleague's place, and we were practicing assessing each other, and we got to the talus palpation part, and I was feeling pretty confident about it. And I had my hands on, and then she looked down and said, I don't think you're actually on my talus. And I was like, yes, I am. I was so sure of it. And then she put her hands on mine, and she said, okay, you're on a part of my talus, but it's not the same part that I palpate. And what we discovered was that I was on a bony landmark, the systentaculum tali, whereas she was palpating the neck of the talus. And I remember I felt so embarrassed, and I felt so stupid. And I felt like I couldn't trust myself anymore, because I had been so sure for years that I was on the right part of the talus. And now I was being told by someone I respected that I was wrong. But you know what, on reflecting on it, I don't think I was wrong. I was just on a different part of the talus. In the anatomy and motion courses, Gary encourages us to palpate the neck of the talus, because you can get the best information of the subtalar joint axis from palpating the neck of the talus. But I'm going to be easy on myself. I don't think one place is necessarily better than the other. However, it does help to get clear on which part you're actually touching, which I clearly didn't know. And so I'm really glad that she called me out on this, because now I have more awareness. And when I palpate the talus these days, I like to actually palpate both landmarks, just in case one is easier to find and one might give me better information that I can actually work with. And so that's been a real game changer for me. So embrace being called out. Just do it wrong. Get someone to tell you you're wrong. You'll learn a lot from it, and you got nothing to lose. Okay, now, what should you do if you're new to this and you actually want to get better at your talus palpation? So, Andy, I have to commend you, because it sounds like you're already employing a great strategy, which is to get people to come in for free assessments. And this is really great, as you already described, because you can create an environment in which you feel safe to make mistakes. And this has worked really well for me as in my practice, because the best way to get better at something is just to get in a lot of reps. My partner and a fellow anatomy and motion practitioner, Rob Sawyer, who also does all the artwork. So you have already seen his imagery in online PDFs and things for anatomy and motion courses. He has the saying about mastery, which I think is my favorite saying of all time. Keep practicing until you don't suck anymore. So you need to get hands-on with as many feet as you can, and you will reach a point where you realize you're getting more confident with it. And this point just sneaks up on you. One day, you just realize, oh, that was easy. It might take months or years. If you're like me, it'll take years. But consistency is key. Make a goal or set an intention that no matter if you use the information or not, no matter if you feel confident about it or not, you're going to feel the talus bones of every person you work with for the next 30 days. 30 days. No expectations to do anything with the information. Just get in the habit of doing it, and you'll be really amazed at what you can learn. As you're learning and getting in your palpatory reps, please, especially if this is a paying client, please try not to have a spaz in front of your client and let them see that you're frustrated if you can't find their talus. We don't want you coming across as stressed and confused and untrustworthy. Just go, yes, very interesting, and then write something down or draw something out. And then describe what you are confident in to them. If they need some information about what you're doing, just tell them what you can feel good about and then move on. Make decisions based on the information you feel confident about, not the information you're not. And in the meantime, just get practice and become more competent at the stuff you're not good at so you can build confidence and have a more fuller picture of all of the bones in the body and how to touch them over time. Okay, another practical tip, and in my personal opinion, this is the best place to start, and it's practicing finding your own talus bone. I remember a distinct day in 2016, and this was in Melbourne on my 4th Anatomy in Motion course. I spent at least a good half hour sitting in a corner by myself with one of the foot models and just comparing it to my own foot. Feeling each ridge, each joint, each bone on the model, and then seeing if at the same time with my other hand I could palpate those exact spots on my own foot. And you can also follow the same instructions Gary gives us for how to palpate a talus and do it on yourself and do it standing. So this is to find the neck of the talus, or like me, you've been accidentally palpating the sustentaculum tali for years thinking it was the neck. Either way, as long as you're on a consistent landmark, it's probably going to be fine. So again, this is an audio podcast, but if you would like to follow along with this guided palpatory experience, if you are standing with your feet next to each other, and let's say choose one of your feet, and you can take your hand and just run it up along the medial border of the first metatarsal bone. And as you run up that medial border, you'll bump eventually into something that sticks out more than the rest of your foot. And that first sticky outy ridge on the medial border is your navicular bone. If you have a foot model handy, also reference that visually on the foot model. And from the navicular, you're going to slide your fingertips just superior and lateral. And you should now be on a general hard surface of the talus bone. Now, to find the neck, it's going to be a sticky outy part that rotates when you rotate. Remember, the talus drives the bus, but the bus can also drive the talus. So just generally have your hands on what you think is the talus. And if you rotate your whole body to the right, let's say you're on your left foot. If you're on your left talus bone with your hands and you're rotating your body to the right, you're going to feel a pointy part of that talus bone bump into your hand on the medial border. That's the medial part of the talus. And then if you rotate your body to the left, you'll feel the talus rotate with your body, and the lateral pointy outy bit of the talus will bump into your other finger on the talus. Keep rotating back and forth until you can calibrate to where you feel like you're holding on to something that feels like a little dice. That's how Gary often describes it. It feels like you're on two corners of a dice. And if you just keep kind of rotating back and forth until you are fairly confident you're on it, then I think that's going to be a really great way for you to start to find your own and then try to replicate that experience on other people. Also, do it with someone who is a practitioner, maybe with you, and they can confirm or deny that you're in the right spot on the talus. Another helpful thing to practice is just finding the talus dynamically, not just with your client standing still. So if you still feel like you can't find it with 100% precision statically, maybe you get better information from having your hands on the talus moving by getting your client to pronate and supinate. Just have them stand in a split stance, and to feel for the pronation of their talus, you can just put your hand over where you think the talus is, whether you're 100% accurate or not. And as they bend their knee and lunge into that front foot, we know it should be pronating, so we know their talus should be internally rotating and everting. So I like to put my hand over the talus and feel if that's actually happening. And if you're really not sure, put your hands just on either side of their calcaneus, and maybe it's easier to feel the calcaneus moving, the heel bone. Does it roll in? If it doesn't roll in, then probably their talus isn't moving either. So it's a good double check to do. And for supination, you can do the same assessment as I just walked through, trying to palpate it statically. Just have them stand feet next to each other, put your hand over where you think the talus is, and have them rotate back and forth. And you should be able to feel that external and internal rotation of their talus in your hands. Even if you're not 100% confident about where it is, at least you can get a sense of, is it moving into internal rotation? Is it moving into external rotation? And then write down what's missing, and maybe that'll be part of your plan for how you want to help get their body moving back as a more whole and complete unit. So thanks for asking that really great question, Andy. I hope that helped, and I'm sure that asking it has really helped someone else who might also be at the beginning of their journey palpating talus bones. And if you want to ask your own question for me to answer on this podcast, please shoot me an email at monica@monicavolkmar.com. And that's Monica with a K because I'm Scandinavian. Well, I'm 1/4 Swedish, so I embrace it. Or you can shoot me a direct message on Instagram at monvolkmar, MONVOLKMAR. If you like my weird and awkward, but hopefully informative and inspirational podcast, and you want to support what I'm doing with Movement Detectivery, did you know that I have an exclusive paid subscription on Substack? Now you do. It's just $5 a month, and you get access to pre-filmed guided movement explorations and access to my anatomy and motion-based workshop, Liberated Body. So just go to monvolkmar.substack.com to see all my previous podcast episodes. There's some gait analysis case studies, and there's some exclusive stuff for paid subscribers only. Either way, thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode coming up your way sometime.